I'd like to start just very quickly with a question about the broader issue of abortion that Women's Rights Movement has raised recently. You talk about it in terms of human rights or human rights, and the objection to that is, the answer to that from people who disagree, is that there's no mention of abortion in the Charter of Human Rights. In what ways is it an issue that touches on human rights?
Well, first of all, let's go with the Convention, the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 8 specifically deals with the right to private and family life. This is then compounded with the Convention dealing with the elimination of discrimination against women, which also says that a woman has a right to time and space, bearing of children. So it is from that, just from that get-go, it is already a fundamental human right. Of course, then, fundamental human rights, you can put one against the other, but what are we talking about here? We're talking about a woman's right, it's not an issue that is related to man, it's an issue that is specifically related to the woman, her right to bear children. So, it is a fundamental human right.
People will argue, of course, that we're also talking the right to bear children and the right not to bear them under certain circumstances.
The right to bear them,
some people might say that they're not the same thing.
I have a right for that. I have a right to live in dignity. So if something has led to me ending up pregnant in a situation that I cannot have and continue with that pregnancy, I have the right to live with dignity. I have a right to my life too as a woman. If, for example, the pregnancy is harming her life, it's going to be detrimental to her life.
In fact, the position paper that you came out with isolates 4 cases in which your movement argues that Maltese women should have access to a safe abortion, or safe access to abortion. And they are, the one you just mentioned, the threat to the mother's life. One of them is the possibility of a fatal condition affecting the fetus. I understand that would die anyway. There was a reaction to that from the Disabilities Commission, saying that it might pave the way to eugenics and so on. How do you respond to this sort of reaction?
Again, let's go to fundamental rights. Right. I always like looking at things from a rights-based approach. And again, this will have to be dependent upon medical and science. A woman is told, a person is told that the baby, the fetus, is going to die anyhow. I think even just seeing it from that point of view of that child, the child to live with dignity, basically, And I think it is very cruel, really, for a person, both for that child, die anyhow, and both for the parents or for that mother.
What actually happens in today's situation under those circumstances?
At this point in time, she still have to go ahead with go through with the full-term pregnancy, unless, of course, there is the option, and it happens. We know that it happens that they would travel outside Malta and have it, abroad.
Coming back to the first example you gave of the woman's life being in danger. The argument that we often hear in Malta is that it already happens, in the sense that we were aware that there are cases where the doctor has to make, or the medical people concerned have to take a decision, and generally this decision will always be in favor. And there's even a principle, a toe mine principle, which we don't need to go into, which sort of justifies that. So, given that the argument is that it's already happened, why is there a need for a legal? Why does this need to be put into a legal infrastructure?
Okay, it happens. It doesn't happen. We don't really know. One is to assume that, for example, in cases of cancer, if the mother is pregnant, that she's still provided with the treatment, which would then eventually, yes, of course, in an abortion. Again, I think also it has to be, it all boils down for me, it's down to choice. And you have to give it a structure. It has to, you cannot just assume that it is there, and yet it is not. Because for me, the way I see it, it is a choice. You have to give that person a choice.
One of the strange things about our abortion law is that it doesn't mention abortion at all, and it's a very old law which has not really been updated over the years, and there's evidently very strong resistance to updating it. I mean, to give you an example, it talks about imbibing substances which might kill the unborn child. It's obviously written at a time before contraception as we know it today. I mean, how do you account for this reluctance, this resistance to, at the end of the day, upgrade the law to present-day realities?
Well, I think it's part of it is also part of our insularity and this sense of wanting to have our culture, to stick to our identity, that we are different. And of course, it's also the influence of Catholicism and indoctrination. I mean, for me, that is what it is. So I think that would be part of that. And I think even when one had to look at the negotiations that took place when Malta was negotiating its treaty with the European Union, that was, apart from everything else, that was something that had to be kind of sanctified, if I can say so, protected, which also is quite disappointing, really, to see that even the European Union, the rest of Europe, had no problem with that. So it's okay, and I would say, it's throwing the women under the bus, that's fine, as long as everything else gets going.
It's a very interesting point you raised, because at the same time as all this is going on here, the European Union is funding initiatives to ensure that women in, even for example, Africa and other parts of the world, in parts of the world which are less developed, have access to free, safe, well, maybe not free, but safe abortion. So that's something that the EU is committed to doing. And yet over here, we're an EU member state, and look how hard you have to fight for the same treatment as women in the rest of the world. Do you feel that Maltese women are second-class European citizens?
Yes, very much so. I think that Maltese women are very much being discriminated, perhaps because of our, again, we're not particularly interesting because of our small population, So it's kind of like we're non-existent, and it's all the constant hypocrisy. And that is one of the things that even as an organization, hence why we founded the organization, because women have never had a voice. They were always somehow shushed and hushed in this country, So something had to be done, We are not second-class citizens. We're not there to be discriminated, We are human beings with our own individual rights.
At the same time, sort of like Maltese women's organizations, for example, of which there are a few, came out very, and you're quite the contrary, actually. It seems that your movement has more or less is more or less isolated in this view. How do you account for that?
Well, to start off, kudos. There have been some organizations, for example, the Network of Young Women Leaders and Graffiti have also then, they had come with us. So sort of there are some. But on the other hand, let's not forget the taboo and stigma that shrouds the topic, and that is another reason why we wanted to do this. To say it's okay, we can talk about it. It's fine to talk about it, but there again, we even as organizations, we depend on funding. You never know how that's going to happen. They might be fragmented, but we have received messages of support, private messages of support, which I think is very encouraging for us.
You've also received a lot of negative feedback, let's call it that way. That has extended to death threats, for example. This is two things, spring to mind. One is that part of the reason why women find it so hard to come forward and say, you're being threatened for having an opinion, from as far as I can see. And two, how do you respond to the fact that you are actually being threatened on a human level? How do you actually?
I am not afraid. I'm just not afraid. If I were afraid, I wouldn't do the job that I do. As an organization, again, we confront perpetrators every day. I confront them in a court of law. I have been threatened. My tires have been slashed. I have been stalked. I've received, the messages, the calls at home, telling me who my children are. But I'm not afraid. So nothing is going to stop me to continue fighting for women's rights.
At the same time, this aspect of the discussion, in my view, kind of takes over from the actual discussion itself. So we end up, in the press, we end up talking about the hysteria that surrounds this issue rather than the issue. We know there are statistics that a number of women, you mentioned this yourself, go abroad anyway. We know there are cases where it happens, what they call backroom abortion. let me just assume that everything remains as is, and then your proposals. I mean, are we going to? How is it going to be a case of continually sweeping the issue under the carpet? Do you think?
No, we are not going to stop.
Not you. No, I meant. How do you feel about the fact that we all only ever talk about the negative response to what you're proposing, rather than what you're proposing?
My answer to you is because you want to sell your paper.
Well, it's not also our paper. I mean, it's the general public too.
Because I think it's again going back to the hypocrisy of it all, of how kind of it happens, it doesn't happen, but it's more interesting to talk about pointing fingers. You know, it's. I think it's a bit endemic of our culture as well, really, of how we deal with things. But yeah, it's going to happen anyhow. The debate is going to happen, and we're going to make it.
But that's debatable. It's not the debate is going to happen. There are forces at work which want to stifle the debate. That we've seen, for example, in the past, there were initiatives to entrench the existing abortion law into the Constitution, precisely so it couldn't be discussed or changed. And yet you say it's going to happen. I mean, what makes you so sure?
Yes, our position paper has to be seen as a full package. We cannot just talk about abortion, otherwise nothing makes sense, okay? This is like a chain. So we have to talk about having a proper national action plan, okay? We have to talk about sex, again, another taboo subject. Ooh, said the word sex, you know? We have to educate our children about sex, about healthy relationships. We have to provide the contraception, all forms of contraception, and make it accessible. I mean, we're saying let's go for free contraception. Portugal have done it. Once the Portuguese started introduced free contraception, the rates of abortion went down, you know. So one is tied to the other. We cannot just talk about just the abortion. Because in fact, one of our recommendations was let's decriminalize abortion because it's happening anyway. Let's remove the stigma that shrouds the topic, you know. But at the same time, we have to educate and we have to make it accessible, you know.
All these require legal changes, and legal changes in Malta can only be enacted through Parliament. So you need there's a level at which you need political interest, backing, support, whatsoever. In a country where traditionally all parties have publicly declared themselves to be pro-choice and absolutely averse to discussing, there are a few exceptions. AD has signalled a slight change in it, but. Given that there is such a consensus among the political class not to affect these changes, where does that leave you? How are you going to convince the political class to change its approach, for example?
I think that is why we called for have issued this position paper. I think just also to highlight the lack of understanding and the lack of awareness that there is surrounding the whole topic. And I think that once it is debated and talked about in a healthy way, I think that, and we've had that. We've had people come approach us and say, actually coming to think of it, what you're saying makes sense. And I think sort of as times go by, I mean, Malta has come a long way, I mean, we've got civil gay marriage, civil unions, cohabitation. So I don't see why this country cannot also comprehend or try to understand and discuss this, and sort of listen to each other. And I think that will change things.
One of the concerns that have been raised by the obviously people who are opposing what you say is the thin end of the wedge argument. It's like today they're going to talk about women whose life is in danger and fetal anomalies and so forth, and tomorrow is going to be abortion on demand, late-term abortion and so forth. Isn't there also isn't the concern partly justified? I mean, isn't it true that in the long term the argument is that women should have the right to choose? It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be on at death's door to have that. Wouldn't you agree that this is going in a direction and is going to be more than?
It's not just us who's saying this, that women have the right to choose. Again, going back to fundamental rights, women have the right to choose. Okay, I've mentioned the different conventions where that emanates from. But even also the Commission for Human Rights, I mean, even when they came to Malta, not just recently last year, but prior to that, and they said that, and actually the European Court of Human Rights has said, okay, right to abortion is not a fundamental right, but right to access to abortion is a fundamental human right. So, you know, that's it, basically. We are breaching women's fundamental human rights. So if a woman wants to access abortion, who am I to judge? Who am I to condone? You know, it happens anyhow, just the same. But of course, at least to have it accessible and legalized, okay, without the stigma in those specific circumstances, you know, that then you'd be really dealing with human and degrading treatment for me.
One other aspect about the access, the difference between access to and abortion itself, is that one argument that could be raised, I've heard it, is that but women do have access to abortion.
The privileged ones.
What is women, the argument being is this, what is women do have access to abortion because it doesn't happen here, but it happens quietly in the background, nobody, without a fuss. And I've heard this from women that they're actually more comfortable that way because they wouldn't want to be seen going to an abortion clinic. In Malta, they still go abroad. From that perspective, why bother? Why attach so much importance to the issue?
Education has a big component here to play. I think once we educate ourselves and understand and be compassionate and listen to one another, I don't, you know, we won't be in a situation where I would feel ashamed or want to hide. I mean, again, I think as a country we've moved really, you know, we've come really, really far. So, you know, and I'm sure it can happen when it comes to sexual education, contraception. I mean, let's face it, we still have the same mentality, you know, with children going to buy condoms, you know? It's like, oh, it's embarrassing. I have to go and buy a condom. Why? Why should we feel embarrassed to go and buy a packet of condoms?
Parents will feel a lot worse when the child comes back pregnant. Yeah, I get what you mean. Why are we so different from the rest of the world? I mean, this is a question that it's been puzzling me for a long time. I don't expect a...
No, I think it's just I have my own personal opinion on this. I think it's our insularity. I think it's really our insularity. We kind of just cocooned ourselves here and, you know, we've created this image that we have, that we're Catholics, you know, that's really part of our national identity. But I also say that we're also very hypocrites. Because at the same time, we still go abroad and we do things differently, you know, and it's fine, it happens there. But here we have to pretend, as you know, kind of as we're saying now, like I would still go abroad and do it. I won't do it here, just in case my neighbor will talk about it, you know. So, yeah.
And has a time come? You mentioned earlier, I think it was off camera to be honest, but you mentioned earlier that you, on top of the negative feedback, you're also getting words of encouragement. How would you gauge, you know, leaving aside statistics, which might be misleading for reasons you already mentioned, how do you gauge popular opinion on the ground, especially from women, obviously, on this issue? Is it really as 90% versus 10%?
Let me tell you, let's go back to the fact that here we're talking about fundamental rights. It's not a matter of popularity, it's about that individual. And we've had the stories, women have approached us with their stories. And that is why we did what we did, you know, because we need to give a voice about those individual rights, about those individual stories. It's not a matter of popularity. I think this is something we really have to keep in mind.
You suggested recently that the polls may be misleading because people might not be forthcoming or open. Do you think that, is there a groundswell of change in opinion among Maltese women who are, the ones you are speaking to?
We've had people that say, you know, before I couldn't even think of the word abortion, but I've read the paper, you know, and I can understand what your reasoning is, and sort of, yes, we can, you know, possibly consider you know, definitely decriminalizing, because they would see we can't judge anyhow. But at the same time, you know, having legal and safe abortions in those circumstances. So I think just that in itself is already for me, I would say for me, you know, a ray of hope. It is something. But again, I need to stress on this, because here it's not a matter of popularity. You know, that is why it's a rights-based approach. You know, about that individual's right. You know, this is not a referendum issue, by far. I'm very disappointed. I'm not disappointed. I mean, I can understand what Ireland is going through because they have to remove it from the constitution.
And we could be in the same situation if...
Yeah, but it's not a popularity contest issue, by far.
it seems to be that when in Malta, Maltese politicians play this big Catholic identity card, and but when they go out in the European Parliament and in European institutions, they're either careful not to mention the issue at all, or to send out a very different. How long before this balancing act becomes too visible to everyone to carry on playing? I mean, we speak one language in Malta and another language in Europe.
I think one of our members of parliament has, sort of highlighted that very clearly.
I mean, there are also not many women members of parliament. I believe it works out at 11% or 14% of the total. Have any of them come out in favour of your proposals? Or stuff from there?
I believe that one member of parliament said that she agrees on the contraception recommendation.
On the actual access to abortion?
No, on access to contraception.
No, this goes back to the question I asked earlier. I mean, these are Maltese women in Parliament. You can't say they're representing Maltese women, but they are Maltese women in Parliament, and on that level it can be. And it's already a small representation, and in that small representation the answer is already no.
I don't know. I haven't spoken to them.
No, but when it comes to it, they belong to parties that are firmly.
Exactly. I mean, so as individuals, I don't know where they stand. As women, I don't know where they are. But of course, they belong to a party. So I understand, of course, that they might not, be in a situation to go out publicly.
Right. But do you feel, from the feedback you're getting, do you feel that they may be secretly agreeing with you without being able to say it? Is that an impression you've ever got from?
I haven't received any feedback, so I'm not in a position. It's too soon to know. So.
Out of curiosity, were you expecting prominent Maltese women politicians, for example, to support you more?
No.
No, okay. I was a question asked for my curiosity, because in your position I would have expected a bit, to be honest, but.
No, because it's so controversial, and we are so all about politics in this country, and so I understand them not being as vocal.
Last question I'm going to ask you. What outcome are you hoping for, realistically, with this drive, with this push?
I think that definitely we see a change, and that our recommendations, at least recommendation 1 to 5, are taken on board soon.
So you're expecting the recommendations to be adopted then?
Yes. I mean, this is what we are hoping to achieve, let's put it that way, because I think they are very reasonable recommendations. They specifically deal with prevention to then abortion, basically. So I don't see why they should not be acceded to. We do hope, of course, that we will see a change when it comes to decriminalisation of abortion. I think those women deserve that. I think women deserve that, And of course, I mean, yes, ideally that will have a change. And recommendation number 7 to access to safe and legal abortion is also adopted. But at least that it is decriminalised.
Very good. Okay, for my end. Thank you.